Hello, today I want to share with you what I know about GoZ, the exciting ZBrush integration with Daz Studio. A few of you wanted to see an updated version of the videos I've made a few years ago. The workflow is still the same, but some of the features have changed. And also welcome Alex from Daz, who's getting started with ZBrush and GoZ. So, this is a perfect opportunity to combine all of you together. And if you do have any questions, then drop me a comment and I'll try my best to answer them. I have a Genesis 9 character here, Olivia, with a pregnant morph, and I've put some Genesis 8 clothing on her to show you some of the issues that we can easily fix with GoZ. Like the underboob thing is a problem, so we're going to fix that in a moment. And also, as I go to posing the character, some of the weight maps need a little bit of an adjustment here. I have to tell you, this was slightly difficult to find an example of things on Genesis 9 because the new figure generation just drapes conforming clothing so much better than previous generation worked out. So it's Genesis 9 clothing hardly needs any fixes at all these days. It's kind of cool. But before we get to Olivia, let me go and focus on the sphere here and also how to install GoZ in the first place. So close down Daz Studio, close down ZBrush, open up your install manager, and then look for GoZ, G-O-Z. And that'll bring up sometimes multiple versions of it. If you only have one version of Daz Studio installed, then it's this one here, GoZ for Daz Studio. And just click that and hit download and then install. So if you have other versions installed, like the public beta or the publishing build, then make sure you only install one version of GoZ. I'm using the publishing build, and this is the one that I've installed here, and it works flawlessly well. Back in the day, there used to be, and you might remember this on this little gear icon here under advanced settings, you had to tell Install Manager about where applications are installed. I don't think you need that anymore. I mean, I have it in here, but I've installed GoZ recently on another system in which I didn't give it that location and it found ZBrush no problem. So I don't think this is necessary anymore. Daniel told me from the Bridge team, he told me that Unreal Engine and Blender, they don't need to know these things anymore. They just find whatever versions installed and install themselves there. Once installed, head over to Edit, Preferences, and have a look under the Bridges section, and you'll find a new box here under the ZBrush section. So there's two options that are disabled by default, so they're set to no by default. The first one, set that to yes, show options, because that means as you import things over from ZBrush, a more expanded dialog box will pop up that lets you make changes, and we're going to need those later. Update path, I don't really know what that is, to be really honest, so I set that to no and it kind of works okay. If you do know, please let me know in the comments. And then you can hit accept, and then you're ready to start working. So let's focus on the sphere here. Select an object in the Scene tab here and head over to File, Send to ZBrush. This is a little cumbersome if you do this a lot. There's also a little toolbar icon available that you can get, and then it's just a single click. It'll open up one little dialog that comes up with two options here: export at current resolution and export with deformations. Usually you want to leave the first one unticked and the bottom one ticked. In the case of my sphere, it's not going to make a difference, but the current resolution means, do you want to apply the subdivision surface modifier before you send this object over to ZBrush? In which case you'd have a higher resolution object in ZBrush, but in order to bring it back, you need to have the MorphLoader HD plugin, and that is only available for PA. So usually you want to leave that ticked off. Export with deformations means, do you have any morph targets dialed up? So custom characters, that sort of thing, anything that shapes your character with a pose dial. So for custom characters that need a tweak, you usually want to leave that enabled. And when you hit accept, ZBrush opens automatically and load your object. It's not displayed in the viewport at this point, so you're going to have to make that happen manually. If you haven't used ZBrush before, this might be a bit of a culture shock. It is unlike every other 3D application. They made really sure of that. But don't be overwhelmed by all the features. It is something that will grow on you, because for this workflow, we only really use a very few features, and ZBrush can do so much more, but we're not going to really use it. So first thing to do is press the comma on your keyboard to take this lightbox pop-up away. Then you can see that my sphere is already loaded here as a tool. If you go and left click and drag this out, you can also hold down Shift to constrain that, but that's not really necessary. Then you let go of everything and immediately hit T followed by F. T brought us into edit mode. So the previous one is this mode where you can draw out objects, but you can't manipulate them. Edit mode is the one where you can actually change your 3D object. And F just frames the object up. Navigation ZBrush, ever so slightly non-standard, I think is the term I'm looking for. Right-click off the object to rotate around. Alt, right-click off the object to pan. And as you do that, when you let go of Alt, you zoom in and out. That is a little weird, I know, but it does grow on you. And there's also these little icons here for move, zoom, and rotate. You can use those as well. I tend not to do that, but that's what you can do. Now, to make a change, you can left click and drag somewhere on your object to use the currently selected brush on the object. Alt left clicking will do the opposite of the brush, usually inverts them. So the standard brush pulls things out, and with Alt, it will dent things in. That's the basics. I've made myself a change. I might make a bigger change with the move brush here, and also maybe make the draw size a little larger and just drag this out so we can see a definite change on my object here. There. So once I'm done, I can go and click the Go Z button to send this back to Daz Studio with a single click. Now, just before we do that, and this is important for those of you who have multiple versions of Daz Studio installed, you must tell ZBrush which version you're talking to. If you only have one version installed, don't worry about it. But if you have multiple installed like I have, you can head over here to Preferences, and then under Go Z at the bottom, left click and drag to get this up. You can go and update the paths to your applications. You can go and force reinstall, update all paths, or in my case, I just want to click on this here, path to Daz Studio, and just tell ZBrush I'm talking to a specific version, namely in my case, the publishing build. So it remembers, but sometimes if you send an object back and it opens a second instance of Daz Studio, then this path is not set correctly. So in my case, it's fine. Publishing build is what I want to talk to, and then I can go and click Go Z, and then Daz Studio will come back into focus and gives me this dialog. It says, do you want to update the geometry? That's usually what we want to do, the first option here. There's another two options here that we rarely ever use. So the first one is usually what you want to do, but it has two options. It can either create a morph, and once again, it's the default and it's what you usually want to do. And this is kind of the Morph Loader Pro interface on the bottom here. It'll create a morph with the change that I've made in ZBrush and store it on my object. And that is what I'm going to do with all the defaults selected. If I hit accept, nothing appears to have happened. That is because with my object selected, I'll head over to the parameters tab. And here I have a category now called Morphs, ZBrush. And if I dial this morph up, then my change happens just like I saw it in ZBrush. That's how that works. The other option that we saw there, I can also reverse that change if I wanted to do that. The other option that I saw there was update the base geometry, and it will not create a morph slider. It will actually update the base geometry. So it's essentially like exporting an OBJ of this and then importing it again with edit object geometry, update base geometry. So this will change the base vertex positions of your object. And that is also possible. And your changes will be reflected immediately, but it won't, for clothing, it won't get saved with your scene files. So that's important to remember, because if I were to save my scene and then go and load it back up again, Daz Studio would grab, say, the jacket, not from the updated base geometry. It'll grab itself a fresh copy from the library, which does not contain my change. Whereas if I save this as a morph target, that morph target will be persisted with my scene. So that is the difference. Just to show you this again, if I'm back here in ZBrush and I'll go and make maybe another change on the other side here, like that. Now, so it has both changes in there, but now if I go and click Go Z, and once again, I don't do anything. I could change the morph name here. It'll just go and increment the numbers here. I now have two morph dials that I can dial up independently from one another. So that's quite nice. If you make two changes, you can dial them in and out one by one. But if I were to go and do this again, so with nothing done, I could go and select Go Z again, and now select Update Base Geometry or Base Mesh. I say accept. Then this whole change will be visible immediately, and none of the sliders are active. So that's essentially the difference of what that is. So if you're going to save this object out either as a support asset, prop asset, or if you save the scene, then it'll get saved as embedded geometry and those changes will come back. If you work with clothing items from the library, this version of the change will not come back. Only morph targets will come back. So that's the basics. Now let's get to fixing these issues here on her breast. And that is something that is slightly more complicated. So first of all, we have the character as the top node here, but then we have all these clothing items and other types of attachments underneath it, and Gozi is clever enough to send them all over as subtools. So my figure will be an object, but then the jacket and the top and the trousers, they're all going to be subtools in ZBrush, and you can select them independently and make changes to it. So let's go do that. I'm going to use my little icon here, or maybe just go in File, Send to ZBrush. With deformations, yes. At current resolution, no. Accept. And there we go. We can see all these objects being loaded there and populated into my viewport. This might take a while, especially if you have heavy objects like hair and whatnot. That'll take some time. And eventually we're good here. So we're already in edit mode. This is, I don't have to drag my object out again. It'll remember that this is still the Gozi connection here, and I'm still in edit mode, and it's just replaced my bits and pieces here. So I want to make a change to, well, usually what I do is I click on transp here, and that is kind of a ghost mode in which I can see the object that is selected in my matcap here. If you don't like red, then you can change that here as well. If you wanted to have maybe a skin shade instead. Red is kind of, you know, it kind of works well, so I'll leave it in there, and everything else will be shown in transparent so I can see where things work, where things intersect. And currently the red thing is my active object, and if I wanted to select another one, I can just go on Alt left click on it. So like say the jacket here, or Alt left click on the top here. So I need to, in this case, I need to really fix two things. I need to fix the top, and I also need to fix the jacket. Just to show you where these things are, they're on the tool shelf here in the tool palette. There's a section called Subtool, and if you open that up, you can see all these bits and pieces. You can also isolate them from here if you want to do that. I'm going to go and just fix the jacket for now. Alt left click on that, make my brush a bit smaller with the space bar. So you hold space and then this little menu comes up. Draw size is the size of my cursor here. And I'm going to go and do this with the smoothing brush. BSU in my case goes back to the normal brush, but if I wanted to use a smoothing brush, I hold down Shift, and as you do that, you can see that this icon actually changes here. So as I do that, I can see that also my Z intensity changes, which is the amount of smoothing I'm using. So if I go and hold down Shift and then left click over this region, you can see that everything gets smoothed out, but sadly way too much. It's kind of melting away. So that was, the strength was a little bit too much. Control Z to undo that. So hold down Shift and drop down the Z intensity to something like, I don't know, 10. And then I can draw with something that makes a much smaller change here. You can also go use the square brackets to make that a bit smaller here. And you can go and fix these changes. There's also symmetry. So in this case, symmetry would have worked because it's a relatively symmetrical garment. Let me go and do that. Go back to kind of here. This is this is kind of an undo history thing, like a history thing. So you can go back to here, press X. That'll switch on the X symmetry. Now, if I go and make a change to the left side, then it'll also be populated on the right hand side. Smoothing is usually used in conjunction with the other tool. So if you smooth this in and then you go and use the regular standard brush to bring things out and then go back. Standard brush is currently also a bit too heavy, so I'm going to go and turn that to 10 as well. Drag that out. That's either that, or there's also this could also be smoothed here a little bit. You can also use the move brush. That's another nice one if you wanted to make bigger changes. BMV or BMT, and then if I make this a bit bigger, I can go and left click and drag to move the cloth away. If there's something intersecting, this is a really good way to make that change. And nice and careful, nice and easy does it. Z intensity is often dragged up too much, so don't be afraid to dial that down. But yeah, this is essentially how we've now made a change for the better on the top. Now let me go back to the jacket. You know, I've accidentally dialed the time back to before the jacket was loaded, so the jacket has kind of disappeared. That's okay. We can go and redo that. It's just this strip in the middle there that goes away. There we go. So that's now, let's say that's now fixed, the top. You need to be on the top and then click the Go Z button to send the changes of the top back to Daz Studio. If you want something else like the Daz character, then those changes will be sent back. We don't want to do that. We just want to send the top back. So Alt, just make sure you're on the top, hit Go Z, and then in Daz Studio, you have this dialog again, and I'm going to go and call mine top fix, or be descriptive, whatever you fix there, and then hit accept. Now, notice that it says up here, this is for the survival instinct top, so it'll have the object that this is made for, this change. If you select that, we're not going to see anything because we need to go and select the top here, and under parameters, here's my top fix, and that's now smoothed all that out. If I go and take the hoodie away, we can see what a wonderful change we've made here. So this was the default, and this is what we've fixed. And this is what we do all the time when we build scenes so that they look the part. Now the jacket here, I've made the small mistake. I've used this also needs fixing, but I can't see it in my Go Z scene anymore. So if you needed to send something else back, you just select the top character again and head over to File, Send to ZBrush, and do the same thing again. And now my jacket is going to be back in action. Let's go and fix that. Alt left click on the jacket, zoom in a little bit. All our bits and pieces are still the way I've set them up earlier. So hold down Shift. We're still working with symmetry. No, we're not. X for symmetry. Shift, and I'm going to go and smooth this out until I'm happy. Often, if you do too much smoothing, then you're going to destroy features in the garment. We don't want to do that. So even if it appears to take a long time, like this is a bit of a kink here, this might be difficult to fix. Yeah, this might be unfixable. Let me go and do the smooth brush and really strong here now. Look at that. This is borked, so not everything can be fixed. So those types of things you might have to go into vertex editor and fix it that way. So yeah, that I can't fix. I'm afraid that I can't fix. Maybe there is a tool in ZBrush that lets me do it, but I currently don't know how. So yeah, that's sometimes, you know, we can't fix things even though we want to. Underarms, they're also something that might need fixing, but yeah, that's the change on the jacket done. If you wanted to make it flare out, once again, the move brush is your friend. Draw size a little larger. If you wanted to add a bit of a flare here, X to switch the symmetry off in this case, and you can go and make it flare out a bit, like so. Push that in, DMV for the move brush, and grab that back out until you're happy with your change. So it's, you know, I'm not a ZBrush artist, but I know how to do clothing fixes, so that's, you know, that's what I mainly do here. So with that change, once again, click the Go Z button, and now we're bringing in a change for a different object. Notice Survival Instinct Hoodie, and I'm going to go and call this one once again a chest fix, perhaps. Hit accept, and that will show up as soon as we select that. Chest fix is here, and we're good. Look at that. Almost done. Now, one thing to be aware of, clothing has these smoothing modifiers applied very often, and they improve fit. They're essentially a collision detection, and maybe I can show you this on the trousers here. Let me go and switch off the hoodie and just have a look at the pants. So on the pants, we have smoothing enabled. If I disable that, you might see some poke through. If you see the mesh slightly different in Daz Studio than it appears in ZBrush, that is because this smoothing modifier is not available in ZBrush. So when this is a Daz Studio feature, so the moment you send something over, that is disabled. And you see on the legs here, that's actually a good example. I didn't see that. So the legs, without the smoothing, they poke through. With it, we don't see that poke through because Daz Studio fixes it. So inside ZBrush, I wouldn't be surprised if I go and select the trousers, and yes, I do see the poke through. So be aware that if you see this and you think, hey, where does this come from? I don't see this problem in Daz Studio. Be aware it's the smoothing modifier correcting it. This also means that in some poses, the smoothing modifier will work differently than in others. So if you want to correct that, go ahead and correct this inside ZBrush and then send it back. Switch off smoothing temporarily to see the changes that you've actually made in ZBrush. Something else I wanted to show you is how to overwrite existing morphs. And us artists, as clothing creators, we actually use this all the time when it comes to joint corrective morphs, or what's now known as corrective blend shapes. So a classic example would be if I select my character and use, say, power pose and lift her arm up. So that's always a classic that we see these types of things happening. And this is a combination of weight maps not working properly, weight maps that need smoothing, and also then the underlying corrective morph that creates this, that they need to get smoothed. And the way this works is that we can export our character as is and just make a note of what morph is causing that, make sure it's dialed up to 100%, go fix it, and then bring it back. So it might be a little bit beyond the scope of this quick tutorial, but just to show you how I would go about that, I would select my base figure first, and then I would go into my currently used option here, and I'll see a lot of sliders here. So this is usually should be done on the base figure if you're correcting clothing, but eventually you will see something under the hidden properties here. You will see something like a corrective morph, which is probably something along the lines of this here. It's barely visible, but it's like body CBS shoulder Z55P left. So this is that morph that is correcting this part of the clothing. So this is actually getting corrected on the base figure, but the clothing knows, hey, I think I need to behave the same way because I'm follower clothing, so I need to behave the same way. Without it, it would look like this, and with it, it looks like that. And so it's kind of almost there, but this kind of kink here, that needs to be corrected as well. So if that was the correct one, which I don't actually know if it is, but if it is the one, then you would go and copy this name out under parameter settings. You'd go and just make yourself a copy of that, of the name, not of the label, even though they're often the same. Make a copy of that. Go send this over to ZBrush and go and correct this part. And then when it comes to importing it, you just give it that name. So as I said, I don't know if it is in fact that morph. Let's assume it is. Probably a bad example trying this without actually testing this first. We select our jacket again and fix this as good as we can. So once again with our smoothing brush, for example, but also then if it's too difficult and this is only happening because it's a custom character here, you would go and fix this, put this in here and do your best. Eventually it's perfect, and then you go and send this back like before. And so warning, this could be a big chance that I'm screwing this up now, but you go in here and now you will go and say you want to overwrite this existing morph. So if this is the one that you've broken, you go and say deltas only, and then under name you're going to go and give it the morph name that you've just copied there. So I'm essentially overwriting something that already exists and I'm making it better with the change that I've just put in here. I hit accept, and oh wow, look at that. This has actually corrected the problem that we've had here. So yeah, if you're a clothing creator, you do this several thousand times per item, and that is why this integration is so valuable, because it's so fast for us to do. If we had to, we can do this with Blender as well. The principle is not a problem to do in other applications, but the issue is that we have to manually export the figure and the morphed clothing item, import these manually into the other figure, make the change, export it out, import manually, and this takes a lot of time. Whereas here, it's just a few clicks, so that's what makes this so valuable for us. which is also why we would love it if the now legacy, the non-subscription version of ZBrush 2022 could be supported for, a while, because I'm not sure if many of us want to upgrade to the Maxon 1 subscription for $100 a month. It'd be awesome to have that feature in there. One other thing I wanted to show you that I'm going to use my sphere actor for again is the HD morph loader integration. So the way that works is that if we had sent this object over, there's this other option here, export at current resolution. So currently my sphere doesn't have a subdivision surface modifier applied to it, but all of the Genesis figures and most clothing items have that to imply more geometry than is actually there. And we do that so that the object looks a bit smoother. So on my sphere here, if you look really closely and if you look at the wireframe as well, then you can see that it doesn't have that much resolution, which is why it looked a little pixelated when I looked at it in ZBrush, or why I couldn't make very detailed changes in ZBrush. So the sphere, if I go and add one under Edit, Object, Geometry, Convert to Sub D, then I can see that the sphere is a lot smoother. And what happens here is that Daz Studio under the hood basically subdivides every single polygon that I have currently once. So this is a subdivision here, and as a result, if I look at the curve here, it's a bit smoother. It doesn't go from here to here anymore. It has an additional point in the middle here. But the cool thing is that subdivision on the fly like this works by adding it at render time if and when needed. So this is why that happened. Under parameters, mesh resolution, it's now got this high resolution option here. I've got high res and base res. Those are technically levels of details. So if you switch this back to base res, you'll see that the actual object hasn't changed. It only does this while I'm viewing it in the viewport. But of course, that is also the secret behind the HD morphs. So if I go and switch this to a much higher number here, if I can set this to 2 now, I can see that Daz Studio, if you can see it, you can see that Daz Studio subdivides every polygon twice. So it basically puts a 4x4 into every existing polygon. The dark rows here, the dark lines are the original geometry, and then the lighter gray ones there, the subdivision on the fly type things. So our Genesis figures, they sometimes have a sub D level of 3 or 4 or even more to bring out that wonderful HD detail. And that is stored in a way that the base figure can still be displayed, but high-res detail can be merged in, and we can create those types of details with ZBrush. So let me go one higher and switch my view sub D level to 3, and now you can see that there's 3 subdivision levels happening, and the sphere is extremely or much more high res than it was before. So let me go and switch this back over to filament and go call this object something else. I'm going to call this one the HD sphere. So watch what happens as I go and click Go Z with the sphere selected, and I'll leave the options as they are. So export at current resolution, I'm going to leave that off, and deformations doesn't matter, but I'll leave it on for now, and I'll go and bring this into ZBrush, and I'll see my sphere looks as if it's not subdivided. So regular users will want to do this, because now I can go and make my view radius, draw radius a little bit larger here, make a change like this. And everyone who has Daz Studio and ZBrush can now go and click Go Z, bring this back, say as a morph, and I'll call this one SD morph, and hit accept. And everyone with ZBrush and Daz Studio will be able to do this. And now I see my change. But also you can see that the change is actually looking much smoother than what I've seen in ZBrush. So I don't see the subdivision in ZBrush. So here's the thing, we can transfer this object with or without this dialed up. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go and switch it off and go and send this back to ZBrush. But now I'm going to say export at current resolution. And if you hit accept, I've got a much higher resolution object here. So all the subdivision is now inside of ZBrush. And that means that if I go back to my standard brush and make it extremely small, or maybe even put something like draw with alpha. So I'm going to make it extremely small and draw something like this in. You could have an even higher subdivision resolution, of course, as we do on characters, and you can go and create amazing detail there, especially if I had talent and a tablet, or both even. Imagine that. So yes, this is my high-res my HD detail that I've put in here. If I send this over now, the same dialog comes up, and ZBrush automatically recognizes that this was a subdivided morph. It also recognizes the build resolution here, so I don't have to specify that manually, and it will go and just create a HD morph for me. I'm going to go and just name that HD morph just so that I remember what that is. I hit accept, and once dialed up, I can see that my HD detail has been preserved right here, which is awesome. So this only works if you have the MorphLoader HD plugin installed, which is only available for vendor. So if you're not a vendor and you're watching this and you're trying this out and you get a geometry mismatch error, then that is the reason, because you don't have that option where MorphLoader Pro detects a subdivision level. For it will just say, well, that geometry doesn't match. You're trying to import something with a higher resolution into something that has lower resolution, and that's problematic. So that is how we can do that. It's basically on the fly. As vendors, we don't have to worry about anything. It's really, really nicely done. So if I go back to general and mesh resolution and switch this now back to base res, all my HD detail will be gone, even though the HD morph is loaded up. The SD one is still going to come through like I've made it in ZBrush, but the HD one is gone. And this is exactly how Genesis figures behave. If you load them into the viewport and you don't see all the HD detail, it's because usually your mesh resolution is not set high enough. By default, Genesis figures come in with something like 1 enabled, 1 enabled, and that is not strong enough for me to show this up. So if I go to high res now, even with the SD one switched off, I can see some things happening, but it's certainly not the HD detail that I had in ZBrush. So for that to actually show up, I need to go and switch my view sub-D level to something higher. If you don't do that, often the render sub-D level is set to something higher by default, like this. So 1 is the viewport resolution, keeps it a bit more fluid in the viewport, and then the render will actually come out with a higher subdivision level, and as such will display HD details. But if you want to see them in the viewport, you must set this to the higher subdivision level as well, and then these things show up. I think that is all I had. So it was a lot to take in, but you know, practice. It's a wonderful addition to the DAZ Studio workflow. I wouldn't want to miss it, and it's a shame we don't get perpetual license for ZBrush anymore. But it's one of those things, dent of time, as they say. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, then please leave them below in the comments. If I'll do my best to answer them. Don't be disappointed if I can't answer them, but I will certainly try my best. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.